Hello, my name is Jim Stowe. I'm Director of the Office of Human Rights, and I am delighted to be here on a very, very special occasion to speak with the County Executive, Marc Elrich, to see a county that you now have the responsibility of leading, a very diverse county with three at least of the cities for whom has the greatest diversity across this nation of ours, right here in your jurisdiction. How do you make it all work? And then you throw the issue of resources, housing, is a big issue. Education is another big issue as well. And you've got thoughts on both of those things, I am sure. But how do you make it all work? And then let's throw one more thing at you. Let's then bring in the fact that we are now home to, and we've been very generous and open arms to, people coming from around the world who are coming in here as refugees and as prisoners, I should say in this case, as persons who are running from being prisoners in their own countries. So how do you do all that?
You do as much as you can. I mean, we'd all be fooling ourselves to think that we're doing all that. We don't have adequate housing programs. There are still, enormous numbers of people with incomes that leave them living in poverty and not able to get out of it. I did raise the minimum wage twice. I took the lead on that. I will likely do it a third time. Getting people wages where they can actually support themselves is, I think, really, really critically important for us to do. Housing opportunities, requiring the building of housing that meets the needs of all incomes are the kind of things we have to do. We don't do that right now. We build a lot of luxury housing, and we say, you got to give me 15% of those luxury units, the number of units you build luxury have to be affordable, but only to people making between $60,000 and $75,000. So if you're like the 50,000 or more families who make less than $50,000, you are out of luck if you're trying to find, decent housing. So it's a real struggle for folks. But those are issues we have to confront. Schools, it is heartbreaking for as long as we've talked about the achievement gap, and we're going on 40 years. You can go back and hear people talking about this by the end of the 80s and 90s. And the fact that there's not a whole lot of progress been made on that is a real problem. And, as a former teacher, and I taught elementary school, to me, a lot of that has to do with the underlying socioeconomic circumstances of people. If you're mired in poverty, and if your parents are struggling to pay rent, to put food on the table, it leads to all kinds of conflicts inside of households. Kids get to watch this. If their parents are uncertain about where they're going to live, the kids become uncertain about where they're going to live. These are not problems for an 8 and 10-year-old to have to deal with, but yet they're dealing with it, and then they come into school and you say, just sit here and do your lesson, and never mind what else is going on. And that's not an easy thing to do. I think we've looked too much and assumed that schools can just solve this problem if only there was a better curriculum. And we're not as willing to invest in communities, in decent housing, in dealing with wage issues, and the ability to people to live a secure economic life. We pay very little attention to that. And again, putting it all on the schools tells me that you don't recognize what kids are experiencing and what the effect of poverty is. So those are things we have to deal with, and they are hard to deal with. They are not cheap to deal with. Affordable housing requires subsidies. When you put it to scale like we really need to do in the county, the subsidies get really, really large. And then you add to that, immigrant populations who come here seeking the same things that our immigrant forefathers came here before. Not yours, because they were brought here, but my relatives, left Eastern Europe and came here at the turn of the last century. And they came here looking for economic opportunity. They came to get away from, whether it was in Jewish communities in Russia, what the Russians put them under, or just the general lack of jobs in Europe. They came here looking for opportunities, but people are still coming here looking for the same thing. I've talked with groups about this who are uneasy, and it's like, we've melted people in here before. It works. It's going to take a generation. People have got to learn the language, but at the end of the day, America is a great example of the ability to absorb populations and make them part of this. And I think people now need to look back on our history and say, yeah, this is tough. This is, it's harder than it needs to be, but we have the ability to absorb people. We have the ability to educate people. And there's no reason that, given what our capabilities are, that we can't bring these people into American society. None of it's free, none of it's easy, but it's all doable. And we ought to have enough confidence and faith in ourselves to say, yeah, you wouldn't choose these battles, but if that's the battle you're in, then you fight it like you're going to win it.
And then we have those tensions that do occur. Tensions that around issues of difference, whether it's culture, whether it's religion, whether it's language, or
sexual
other
preference.
kinds of sexual preference. Might very well be one as well. We've got certainly the issue of anti-Semitism. We've got violence against those who may be Muslim here in the community as well. And so we still have those things. So these hate-related kind of activities, we're not immune for those things here, even though we've got, again, some very positive things going for our county, the great diversity that I mentioned a minute ago with our 3 of our cities here in this county. However, we still have these issues. How do we move to a place where persons not only feel as though they are a contributing member of the community, but they are also accepted for who they are as a member of this community? How do we get there? And is there a vision that you might have for that?
Look, I guess, I grew up in D.C., and I got to see racism pretty close up. I moved to the suburbs, and I remember starting elementary school with kids who, like, you were in D.C. and, you played with black kids. I was like, yeah. I was like, but there are people who thought that was distasteful, odd, at the least. And I, dealt with anti-Semitism. And I will say I got, hear anti-Jewish jokes from people of all races and creeds. That was just part of reality. But until people speak out and push back, it's hard to make it go away. You can pass all the laws you want, but if kids are raised by people who believe that, those parents are going to pass it on to their kids. If you've got social idols, somebody you look up to because they got glitzy stuff hanging around, they look important, they look wealthy, they look like they're successful, and they say things, and you admire that person because of the socioeconomic status they've achieved, and then you start to take on some of the beliefs those people have. Or you take it the reverse direction. You have people who are struggling, and you've got people who are saying, these people are going to take your job. These people are going to take your place in school. These people are going to keep you from getting the house you want or achieve the dreams you want. And then you look at them fearfully as competitors that are going to keep you from being able to have the life you want to have. Those are hard things to deal with. And I say this because I understand this is not an easy thing to deal with. But we need to push back more. When you hear things, you need to say things. People should be uncomfortable making racist, sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim comments. You should not be able to say something like that without people making you feel uncomfortable. And there was a time until a certain president came along when it seemed like the tenor of discourse and the tenor of interactions was beginning to move in a more accommodating direction. And to be frank, the more people that behave that way, the more that becomes the norm in the culture. And then all of a sudden, you get somebody in there who says, hate is okay, these people are terrible, all the kind of language that got used. And people who have these fears, it just like reignites it. It like set them on fire again. And you get on the internet now and you Google something and you could wind up with something that you weren't looking for that's the most racist, vile stuff that you can imagine. So this is out there and it's alive. And, I keep, in my mind, it's going to take those of us who don't think that way to be very vocal about that and to be willing to say, this is not acceptable here. And I do believe, like in employment and things, it should be very clear that if you can't abide tolerating the people you work with, maybe you should work somewhere else. And not into somebody who says, I need long trainings here. Here's the real simple training. You can't do this stuff. And we need to be really firm about that.
Been my great delight to talk with our County Executive, Marc Elrich. Thank you, County Executive, for spending time with me this evening on this topic. Black History Month is upon us. Folks, thank you for being a part of our conversation this evening. Again, my name is Jim Stowe. I'm Director of the Office of Human Rights. And it's been my joy, my great joy, to be a part of this evening's program. Thank you.
Thank you.